Give it a moment to show me. It's live. And the dupe. All right. Hello. Good morning. If you're here, just type something in the chat. Let me see you. Let me feel you. It's a little more pleasant and a little more engaging for me to be able to feel who's there. So I've been doing this this weekly series for a while. This one may be the last one that I formally schedule. I'll probably keep talking about things like this in bits and pieces, but I wanted to make a shift in how I'm doing them. So today I'm going to be sharing about a sort of overall visions, something I often, I don't find many spaces that feel appropriate for me to really share this, but I've been wanting to, and so I'm going to use this opportunity to do so. I think it's beautiful. And I think it's very relevant. I think it gives context to, it definitely gives context for the work that I do for myself and for why I make a lot of the choices that I do. But I wanted to make a shift in how I'm doing these weekly talks. So like part of it's a mix of several things. The intent behind it was a mix of several things. One of which was that I just really want mimetic literacy to be a thing in the world. I love talking about it, and it's fun. But I'm noticing that I'm not holding it well right now. My original vision had me there are a lot of topics and specific instances for me to zoom in on, like why religion? What's religion about at all? Like there's an interesting set of questions there that show up a lot of structures about how memes in fact evolve. Details about what you can observe in terms of embodiment, the way that you can watch mimetic strain echo through people, like when people start like I learned a bunch of body patterns from each of my exes, for instance, and I still carry those with me. So and it's such that sometimes when I'm looking around, I can watch other people show, like I can see, oh, who has been interacting a lot based on, oh, that embodiment pattern came from Bill, and I know that Bill does this under these kind of circumstances, and you picked it up here. Well, that's interesting, because those are sort of like the extra signals that sort of hang around the ways in which we embody and implement a lot of mimetic strains. So learning to see those things can be very powerful and very beautiful, and a little terrifying. You can actually, when you actually look at the echoes of embodiment through a civilization, it becomes really obvious. Like you start to be able to really see the movement of memes through people, right? Like literally physically see. So there are lots of topics like this that I have lots of room to speak about. And my original intent had been to write up sort of a brief intro. I feel like you're going to be nailed in this conversation, Ian. maybe. So my original intent had been to write up a little bit of context, sort of add a little bit of extra, like here's what we'll be talking about, and sort of get people thinking a little bit, and then we'd have a conversation about this. Or maybe it's just more of a straight up lecture and not much of a conversation, because like there's a lot that I see and a lot that I want to share, and I think that I have a lot of really interesting things to point out. But I observe that I'm not actually holding that process. Instead, what's going on is I'm feeling kind of stressed as the day approaches, going, I haven't written this yet, I haven't put something out yet. And part of the motive for me has been that when I am standing in front of an audience, when I'm speaking to people, I feel very alive. So I've been trying to use that life to sort of jumpstart my own creativity, which means I'm putting the creativity and the feedback loop in the wrong order. So I'm correcting my energetics here, correcting the way that the causal flow goes. So I expect that I'm working on sorting out the core thing that has me keep vanishing from all social media for weeks or months. Um, and I don't know what'll come out the other end of that, but I want to show up with this from a place that's a little tidier. I see Marcel is laughing, so I know Marcel is here too. If I realize some people may have hopped on a couple minutes late, so like if you're here, just let me see you. Just say hi, so I know who's there, and it affects how I present, and it lets me feel a little more engaged in what's going on. It makes it a little smoother on my side. So to close up a formal weekly thing, I wanted to give this this high level vision. This is something that, so I have a long track record of trying to save the world. Like I've built a company. In Marcel, yeah. I built a company that was designed to make the human race sane. I'm going to invent sanity and teach it to everybody. The Center for Applied Rationality. Before then, I was putting a huge amount of effort into. I don't want to get into a lot of the details of it. A fellow rescuer here. Yep, absolutely hyper addicted to rescuing. I feel like I've actually purged most of the rescuing habits in myself. I'm really pleased with that. It's like one of the main things that I got from encountering Perry Chase. Recovering rescuer. Yep. Yeah. Yes, my name is Michael Smith, and I am a recovering rescueaholic. Anyway, I could go through my my profile of rescuing attempts. I tried to single-handedly end aging. Well, not single-handedly, but also kind of. I tried to end aging using magic, and pseudo separately from that, tried to end it using science. Part of the, well, not the main reason, but one of the reasons I got a PhD in math education was because I could see how we needed to fix STEM education in order to seriously grapple with the challenges of aging. And a lot of the reasoning that people were using to avoid dealing with it was because people had not had their minds honed by STEM thinking. So I thought, so whole life dedicated to trying to save the world. So I mostly purged myself of that, but I still see something. And a lot of my own personal challenge, particularly over the last year or two, has been relating to the vividly clear vision I have of, oh, this is where we could go. And relating to it honestly in a way that is not about trying to make others do it. Okay? Trusting that if others don't do it, then that's actually right. Okay, so I want to be a little less vague here. I'm going to start naming some pieces. So one place to start is to notice how the human race is really, really good at inventing problems they can't solve. Okay, like the political fracturing, climate change. In principle, the pandemic was stoppable, but in practice, it wasn't. Right? If this is something that people in my spheres were screaming about as the pandemic was spreading. Of look, people are not like human civilization is not treating this virus like it is a real physical thing, and frankly, they're still not. There's a lot of symbolic thinking instead of physical thinking. A lot of treating it as though, oh well, if like this a moral tone of you put on a mask and that makes it so that you are protecting people, or the magic 6 feet of social distancing, even though these mechanisms were like, there's some quick reasoning behind them, but they weren't carefully investigated. No one really knew. There's nothing special about 6 feet, such that if you're 5.5 feet, like that's devastating. But if you're at 6 feet, it's fine. Like no, it's there's nothing like that. They just invented the word, the term, or the distance as something plausible. Like I think this will help. So thinks one person somewhere. Because there's a lot of vague reasoning that because our civilization, our global, like our species, I should say, because our species does not know how to stay grounded in the physical world when we think and plan, we end up doing, it's 4.5 in Mexico. Oh, that's great. So because we don't know how to stay grounded in the real world when we're thinking, I mean, it's not just that we don't know how to, but specifically that the thing that, oh, 1.5 meters, yeah. Yep, it's actually, if I remember right, a meter is a little bit less than a yard. So it's actually less than 4.5 feet if you're doing 1.5 meters. Anyway, so the problem is that, as I see it, from where I'm standing, it seems obvious that the issue is that the main challenges people are navigating in their lives have nothing to do with, almost nothing to do with the physical world. The physical world is almost a backdrop. The types of things that people struggle with usually have to do with navigating social dynamics that are messy in a very particular way. Now, this, when I say messy in a very particular way, one frame I find very helpful. This is not the defining characteristic, but if you want a good place to start, to really start seeing the patterns, the thing that Ian and I are going back and forth about with rescuer, I'm a rescuaholic. This is a reference to Karpman's drama triangle, or sometimes called the victim triangle, where you have the victim, rescuer, and the persecutor or villain. Yeah, so really understanding that and learning how to see it helps to make the patterns that I'm talking about a lot more obvious. But there's a kind of dynamic that has the basic essence that people are carrying around in themselves. It seems obvious to me where this comes from. The details of the engine are part of me examining and going, how do we actually address this? How do I address this in my lived life? So like, don't take these details with too much emphasis. I'm just trying to paint a picture. You can see sort of what's going on. The primary dynamic that people play out, and the method by which we organize civilization, is basically based on, I can't be okay in my own skin. I need you to behave a certain way for me to be okay. And if you're the same towards me, then we can do a kind of deal where I'll do the things you need me to do if you do the things I need you to do. Right? So, if you don't agree to this, I'll get upset. I'll deviate, and that will hurt you. But that's symmetric. You could do the same thing to me. So we can kind of enforce this deal on each other. And now that we have this kind of deal and there's this entanglement, this enmeshment, where our okayness is now intertwined. Now we're both okay, or we're both miserable. Hey, Brendan. Yeah, if you pop in late, I would just like to see that you're here. If what you just said counts. It's simply that I like to see and feel people as they come in. I like to know who's here and whom I'm talking to. So there are lots of ways of describing the details of that entanglement. I don't claim to have captured all of the way that the dynamic feels on the inside when this happens, but a very common example that shows up. This is not like maybe the most standard one, but it's one of the loudest ones right now. The sort of savior turned persecutor, or rescuer turned persecutor energy that goes into a lot of the political activism that's happening today, especially in the United States. This business of, you have to protect the marginalized people. You're a monster if you don't. We need representation. We have to do these things. Like, well, part of what's going on there is people getting upset because the world isn't catering to what they need in order for them to feel okay. So they're being upset at. And part of the reason that's an issue is being upset at hooks into other people's emotional systems. Ian's mentioning, oh, that was so me for environmental activism. Yeah, it was me for immortalist activism. right? I was absolutely an activist. I was just an activism in domains that are seriously underrepresented. I still think that. I still think that there's some serious issues and distortions around um, the around the most common attitudes about, like, well, how do you orient to aging? Oh, aging is natural. Oh, but liver disease is terrible. And do you know what the most common cause of liver disease is? You might think it's alcohol, but it's not. But anyway, that's aside. Yeah, he mentions projecting my shame, fear, and grief. Yeah. So this this kind of demand, this emotion-backed demand, is actually the fabric of culture. Absolutely the basis. It's how everything works. This is why the basic way of dealing with a bureaucracy, for the most part, is threat-based. Like, you deal with the government such that you have to get your license in this particular way, or else you get pulled over and fined, or maybe sent to jail. There's nothing about, so like, let me give you an alternative way of enforcing social rules from some sort of centralized source of power. You could imagine, or one could imagine, a government whose design was much more, oh, if you are deviating from the rules in a way that risks everyone, that means that you're missing context. So let's reach in and pause you and so, okay, you keep speeding. This means there is something about how you are focused on your life in a way that is ignoring the context you're in. If you speed, you risk harming yourself and others, and you're creating an issue for the way that traffic works, which is part of the context that allows civilization to take care of you. So what part of your life do you need support in to understand this and to embody it? So let's pause you from being able to hurt people. That doesn't mean suspending the license necessarily, although it might, but not as a punishment, more like a, hey, let's talk to you and sort out what support you need, so that you can come to embody an understanding of the context that supports you, so that you can work smoothly with it. Now, I wouldn't trust any kind of modern government to try to go in that direction. They don't have the capacity. They would use the narrative of that structure in order to control people. It would be more power over, I should say. So I'm not advocating a style of government that does this. I'm pointing that there is a difference in orientation, where you could imagine a source of power focusing on integrating people into a wider understanding of the context, which automatically results in care. Instead of threat-based, you have to do this or else, what's wrong with you? Another way to see the thing I'm talking about is that our culture is based tremendously on the risk of blame, on making sure that we have proper blame distribution. If something goes wrong, it's very important to know whom to blame. And a lot of people's orientation becomes about blame avoidance. How do I make sure I can't be blamed? Okay. This is, I suspect, I didn't dig into almost any of the details of this, but I suspect the glacial speed of the FDA for approving medicines that were relevant for the pandemic, it is still continuing. They're still having issues, even if you grant, like within the system that they're operating in, of course the vaccines are good. Okay? Within that system, they're still working on, like the last update I heard is that they had a committee meeting where they decided to start considering whether to update the vaccines for the current strains. This does not make sense if you're dealing with the physical world, but it absolutely makes sense if you are a bureaucracy that runs on each person in the bureaucracy doing what they can to avoid getting in trouble. Then nobody is actually responsible for doing something that makes sense in the larger scale, because no one has the power. And if you try to push things, you can only do so by distributing threat of blame in the right way. But many people's nervous systems are fried and they can't handle more threat of blame, so they might actually just drag their feet. Right? So there's this, it's this tar pit that's very like this sticky mass that you can't get anything new done, which is part of why we get, I think most people could agree that political polarization is not good. Right? It doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. And I think most people would agree that not having this would be better. Not having this tug of war of power and money and attention and exhausting everybody with these arguments and these like attempts to push and pull and these like this sucks. It just really sucks. It's occurring to me, it's a little strange. Saying it sucks means it is bad. That's really weird. Anyway. But even though we can agree that that kind of political polarization is terrible, for the most part, we can agree on this, we can't do anything about it. The reason we can't do anything about it is that there is no center that can guide. There is no intelligence that can take responsibility for the whole picture. Now, what do I mean by that? So this moves a little closer into what is vision for the future. Right now I'm just describing problems, but it's important for understanding the context. So I'm offering contrast. So basically I see the potential for the entire human race to do culture differently. I'm not the only one by any stretch of the imagination. Right? It's not even nearly the first. This is just my articulation of something I see. And then I started noticing, oh, actually, this rederives pieces of what I see over here with when people talk about game B and what the hippies are talking about in terms of a love revolution. And but there's lots of pieces here that I can see how what I'm talking about connects to them. And that's good. So I'll see about getting there. But there's kind of an image here. Well, I'll get to that. Let me set that aside. That gets into parallax. So when you're in a romantic relationship with someone, neither of you are actually responsible for the whole dynamic of the relationship. You can't be, because the other person chooses to participate and you can't choose what the other person does. Okay? So I mean things like you cannot be responsible for whether you two want to get married, for instance. You can be responsible for things like suggesting the idea. You can be in for it. You might even be able to anticipate that the other person would be in for it if you are. But there's a very basic way in which you cannot actually choose the nature of the whole relationship. What you can choose is what kind of relationship you are available for. And if the other person joins you in that, then that is the relationship that arises, which can include things like having a recurring argument, the same argument you've had with every other partner, you can have with this new partner. Oh, that's interesting, which is, there's a whole story to go in there. That's a common phenomenon. Dating the same problem in different people. So with that kind of getting very clear on that distinction, what is mine to unilaterally choose? What is actually in my power? What can I be responsible for? Literally, what am I able to respond with and to? Distinguishing between that and what you cannot. Like one of the, I won't try to go into a full transmission on this. This is actually something that I dig into a fair bit in Mage, in the program that I run for people to try to embody the parts of where I'm pointing at, that do something really beautiful for each person and give a chance for a new culture to arise. The 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 one piece of that that I'll add here is one of the effects of this sort of codependent culture, co-manipulative culture, where we're all like making emotionally backed demands on each other. I'm describing it like this is all we do. That's not what I mean, but it is the backbone. It is the backbone of how we do culture right now. So in that mess, there's a lot of incentive. This gets back into evolutionary memetics. I won't go into all the details about why, but like this emerges from how memes evolve and what memes are incentivized to evolve into. You end up in these situations where people are systematically confused about what they do and do not have choice over. So you end up with these attempts to pressure your partner to behave a certain way so that the relationship can be a particular way because you are taking responsibility for the relationship being that way. Or you're abandoning responsibility for your contributions and insisting, no, it's because of what they're doing and I don't have control over what they're doing and I'm a victim of this situation. That whole confusion is basically based on not tracking what you do and do not have choice over. I have choice over how I move my fingers. I do not have choice over how the wind blows. And there's a lot of things in between there, but in particular, I don't have choice over how my partner moves their fingers. I don't have choice over what they think or what they want. I actually don't have choice over what I want either, but but I do have choice over how much I align with what I want, how much I back what I want. So that gets into very complicated and very nuanced stuff and be very subtle about the structure of consciousness. And those gesture towards this is a very key, messy domain. As long as we stay confused about where our choices are, we end up in these tangles. We end up reinforcing cultural tangle. But there is a different way to approach it, which is I hold sovereignty. If I have clarity and I maintain clarity and I deepen clarity about what I do and do not have choice over, and I recognize if I am upset about something my partner is doing, that's a fact about me, not about my partner. And if my partner is upset with me about something, I can recognize that as a fact about her, not about me. And I'm picking on partner, right? But like there's nothing here about like specific to romance. It's just that romance is intense. This could be any kind of interaction, any friendship, a stranger on the internet. It doesn't matter. The dynamic is the same. It's just particularly tricky because we tend to date or get romantically involved with people who have aspects that are really good at hooking us in our inner pain. That's part of what we find attractive about them by default if we're not paying attention. The hidden parts of us, the parts that we're not paying attention to, want to experience a certain thing, want a kind of resolution. And so there's some tendency to seek out something that is good at hooking you in a very systematic way. So if you can track that, you don't have to go through those cycles. But if you're not tracking it, and it's hard to track all of it. Like arguably, enlightenment is when you are actually tracking all of it. Anyway, I gave too many caveats there, or too many parentheticals, and now I've lost track. So if I'm holding sovereignty and I'm trusting this other person to hold sovereignty, then neither of us, we're still in a condition where neither of us has choice over what arises in the relationship. All I can do is back my desire and make requests or open up possibilities and see what the other person is up for. And if it's compatible, then something syncs up. It emerges very organically. neither of us control it, which is actually an admission of the truth that's always been there. We're just not masking it with habits and mechanisms anymore. So this kind of organic emergence is, it's really helpful if you feel it and you experience it. Right here, I'm describing an abstraction. Once you experience this, and to the depth that you experience this, this shifts the sense of what is actually possible for human interaction. Like the feeling of being truly emotionally immune to attempts to manipulate, attempts at coercion, saying, "Oh, you're such a monster," or "You're a racist," or like, "Don't you care?" If it comes across like, "You're a zebra," it's like, oh man, that really means something to you, doesn't it? Oh, you're trying to hook me, huh? Oh man, it must really suck to be you in this moment. Which is not about, like, hopefully you can feel it. It's not sucks to be you, but which is more of the back and forth. Like, I'm going to poke you. But if you can actually just cleanly feel, oh wow, yeah, you're really trying to do something to me here. You must be in a lot of pain. Hmm. Well, can't really do anything about that right now. I'm not, I don't feel obliged to do anything about it. I'm sorry you feel upset about it. Good luck. There's a cleanliness to it, which is not about not caring. You can mimic it with not caring. Like, oh, it looks like you're getting upset. You're having feelings. That is not logical. Like that's something completely different. That's about stonewalling. I'm not talking about a numbness. I'm talking about something that's very much the opposite. Being vividly in tune with what's going on with the other without making it mean something about you. That is a skill, a strength that one can develop. And it's something that is antithetical to the nature of how our global civilization currently works. Because of that, if you try to move in this direction, you'll encounter a lot of backlash. To the extent that you do it really well, you'll encounter less backlash. I basically encountered none at this point. Occasionally I get somebody who goes, "How dare you exist in that particular form?" Well, like this is how I dare. I am. Behold. And sometimes some senses of inadequacy still bubble up. I'm going to have this to deal with for the rest of my life. Like, oh, I have more to work on. But for the most part, I don't encounter the pushback anymore. I see Ian saying, "I was so close the other day to accomplish this, but the hooks got me. I could see it. I had the desire to just see, oh, this is not to do with me. It has been such a journey. I can feel it coming." Yeah, and it's also not binary. Although it can be binary with respect to a very particular instance, but and then there are shock points that happen in my experience, but it's not like we're ever done. It's more like, what is the amount of threatened force that I can be present for and say, I see you're threatening me. That means something about you. I notice I feel terrified and I'm able to be with my terror. How much of that energy are we capable of being with? And that's a capacity. It's a capacity you can build. You take the story of Jesus's crucifixion. That's definitely not in my range. Somebody, like if a bunch of soldiers come up and threaten me to say, look, either like you agree with some political bullshit thing, or we're going to crucify you here and now. I'm like, oh wow, suddenly I see the light. Like I can deal with the ramifications in myself of having buckled in that situation, and like digest. I'm not currently at the state where I can look at that and go, yeah, crucify me. I'm going to stand by my principles. Although strangely, I'm surprisingly close. Surprisingly close. The degree of integrity that I can feel myself coming to embody, I can track how, unless my fear possesses me and then moves my mouth for me, there's an element here of don't negotiate with terrorists. This is don't negotiate with terrorist means. If I am unmanipulable, that removes the incentive for attempts to manipulate me to knock on my door. So to the extent that I can be threatened with crucifixion to make me do things, this incentivizes egregores, memeplexes, to threaten me with crucifixion. So it's actually pretty relevant to make it so that I could be able to say, that's nice, go ahead, bring it. I'm very close, I'm very, very close. But in any case, it's about detail and level of strength. That's not quite where I wanted to go. So these are all giving some parameters of how the global picture would work. The reason I emphasize this micro detail is that getting very clear about how an individual interacts is the only thing that matters in a very important way. This derives seeing the whole picture. I'll explain that in a moment, but this stuff that people do where they talk about what the government should do or what laws should be passed or what we should do about climate change. This is insanity. This is complete insanity. So what is that should doing? Oh, we should switch to renewable fuel sources. Should we? I mean, I'm not trying to argue the content. What I'm noticing is the act of pushing this is pushing against something. What are you pushing against? Oh, just the corrupt oil industry. Yeah, well, you know what? The corrupt oil industry is there. So what are you exactly proposing? What does your proposal have to do with the engines of the world? You're not interacting with the problem. You're yelling at the problem for existing. This is insanity. This is like, how dare the oil industry be bad? It should stop being bad. Well, you know, it is doing things according to its own incentive structures. If you can't see that, you are not actually answering the question. Oh, well, we need to change the incentive structures and make the legislators change their laws. Okay, so with what magic power, with what godlike force are you going to change what the legislature does? Ah, we should call our representatives. Yeah, do you have control over what we do? Oh, and that's why you're trying to shame everyone, because you know to use shame to try to control other people. So now you're trying to back your demand that we perform an action that your mind has decided is the right thing to do by weaponizing emotional pain. And Tin makes the connection to like shouting at your kid for having bad grades. Yeah. Yeah, this is not interacting with the ground of reality. It's the same thing as with the pandemic. It's an insanity. And I'm using the term with like this there's a degrade energy to it, like, hey, this is stupid. But I'm also trying to emphasize, and this is the main place that my energy is landing. When I say insane, what I'm actually pointing at is disconnected from reality. It is living in a fantasy and then interacting with the fantasy and then walking around the physical world being shocked that nothing has changed. And then when other people are living in a fantasy and they say mean things, it's like you're playing on some kind of role-playing game. Ian mentioned it's a chaotic frequency. Yeah, so it's this, when I say insanity, I mean disconnected from the world that your body is living in. Right? So now this raises the question, this picture I just painted raises the question, well, then what do we do about climate change? I do have an answer for that. It's a meta answer, but it's the only thing I've ever seen that actually seems plausible. And importantly, it's not just mine. This is something that's organically arising. So I'll get to that in a moment, but Brandon makes a comment here. Since stories like that of Jesus and aspiring for this way of being have been around so very long, do you think it really is something that can be taken on by society, or maybe always just a few of society can mature that much? And there will always be a spectrum, maybe the average of that spectrum shifting, but a wide gradient that's still there that needs to be faced. Yeah, this seems to me like when we talk about the evolution of human consciousness, we're talking about the extent to which, I mean, this is not the only thing, but one of the factors is the extent to which this way of being an adult is something that adults embody. This this is not something a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or even a 5-year-old is really capable of embodying. They're still dependent on an external source, an external force for their own survival. And all of us are to some extent, but the externalization of responsibility is actually a necessity for children. So the process of parenting is, in a very important sense, different from the process of interacting with other sovereign adult beings. So the question of how much of culture ends up sovereign is to some extent a question of how much have we actually matured as a species, emotionally matured, so that physical adults are emotional adults as well, as opposed to operating as children who need external beings to soothe them. This is the essence behind the whole Cartman's drama triangle. It's how childlike are you? Which I don't mean as an insult, I mean it as a mechanical description. It's when you are upset, can you hold yourself and move the feeling like you would hold a child? Or do you need to play the role of a child and demand that somebody else do something to soothe you? Those are sort of the two options. And to the extent that you go for one versus the other is sort of a defining factor about how much you maintain the current status quo of culture and end up stuck and powerless, versus how much you contribute to the emerging culture that is, as far as I can tell, the only way the human race is going to ever be a coherent, sane, kind system. And I do think it is very much a spectrum. It's something like, it isn't just a binary of, do you hold yourself? Like, I mean, yes, if you don't hold yourself whatsoever, then you're kind of trapped in this infantile state. But for the most part, most people hold themselves a little bit and outsource their responsibility a lot. And I prioritize holding my own responsibility, and I still outsource my responsibility a fair bit. So even in me, it's more of a continuum over the course of my life. So I would totally expect a kind of continuum to happen across culture. And what it means for the emerging culture to hold people who cannot participate in full lucidity, like it's a pretty significant question. But I think that it actually has some clear answers. Some of these answers are meta, some of them are very object level. But this is part of the reason why from what I can see, all of the talk about trauma and trauma processing and somatic processing, this is one of the lenses through which, or it's one of the voices through which the human race is speaking to itself about how to become sane and kind. So I think this has been going on for a very, very long time. We're just entering an age where it is possible to be explicitly conscious about what's going on. I wrote an essay a couple of years ago called The Coming Age of Prayer. You can find this on relentlessdawn.wordpress.com. Also, if you want to find any of my stuff, I recently put together a link tree, and that's linked to in my profile. It just makes it simpler. You can find my blog and everything else that I do at the link tree. That's easier to keep updated than it is to keep all of my profiles everywhere updated. In any case, one of the elements of the coming age of prayer, I was using the chakra model to describe the evolution of the human race. And there's a way where you could see the same way that an individual human grows through the process of activating their chakras from the root upward as they get older. Where like babies are root chakra, just about physical survival. Then they get into exploring the world and this kind of fluid interaction with and driven by curiosity. That's sacral chakra. Then you have the terrible twos, which is mostly in the ballpark of 3, my experience. This is where they learn words like no and mine. This is an assertion of will, more of the 3rd chakra stuff. That stuff does show up in ballpark of 2, but like that's activating 3rd chakra type material. You can see the same thing for the human race as a whole. If you look across the arc of time, at least in the standard story, it's possible we've gone through fluctuations, but the human race has been going through the evolution of the chakras in the same kind of way. And it's not like you don't need to believe in the chakras for this. It's just a lens for looking at it. And in that sense, we've actually been in the age of Vishuddha for about 300 to 500 years-ish, Vishuddha being the throat chakra. And that allows us to, like, we can write programs. We have lots of emphasis on law being linguistic and linguistic descriptions. There's a lot of connection there, but we're in the process of going to the Anya or Ajna. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, third eye. And in that has to do with vision, with our ability to see clearly what's going on. So we stop trying to answer our own prayers and instead look to receive. So I'll let you read that essay if you're curious. It's just a frame on what I see as what's emerging. And so, yeah, so in terms of the degree to which people actually embody the Jesus thing, I think the more people who try to do that, the faster this evolution happens. And yeah, I don't think everybody even can. Right? The same way I can't decide what the president does, there are limits to what I can achieve in this one lifetime. But I can lend a piece of my own evolution to the, and I feel like I've got the third chakra or the third eye chakra stuff. That's pretty clearly activated for me. I've got that pretty good there. Okay, so so this so back to this question of, right, so what do we do about large problems like climate change? This gets back to the dynamic that I was talking about with a partner. What do you do about a marriage that's falling apart? Well, neither person in the marriage really has the ability to just decide that the marriage is going to be good now. Right? But what they can do is show up with the intention of being with whatever is true about desire, and to invite the other person into that. And if the invitation is mutual, there's a kind of deep syncing up that happens, a same-sidedness. And my last partner and I went through something like this, and it was how we broke up. It was beautiful and smooth, absolutely gorgeous. We're still very close. We're very clearly friends. And the closeness is a sense of we see each other clearly. And there's mutual clarity of, yeah, we're not dating. We're done. This was back in like January. No drama. There was sorrow, but no real pain. Absolutely smooth, because both of us were prioritizing alignment with the truth of desire and same-sidedness in the process of syncing up. And in that, recognizing neither of us have control over the relationship, about what the relationship is, what exactly the form is that it takes. Are we going to stay together forever? Are we going to break up? We couldn't know, but we could know we're in for whatever's true. By having that kind of orientation, something arose, and it was the most true, beautiful way that we could relate. So I am glad we broke up. I don't wish we were together. There's no part of me. I would rather be single than date her, than be dating her. And I think she feels very much the same. It's not like this, like, oh, we can't, like, here's this rule. It's like, oh, this is just absolutely crystal clear. And because it's crystal clear and because it's same-sided, there was no drama. There was no explosion. In fact, we actually continued to live in the same apartment and sleep in the same bed in Mexico for about 2.5 months, 3 months after we broke up. Yeah, about 3 months. Yeah. And it was absolutely perfectly fine. It was actually easier after we broke up for us to navigate our dynamics, because they weren't laced with the emotional hurt stuff that we were coming to realize. Oh, some of our relationship is based on us entangling with each other in this codependent way. So when we look at that and we put it in the middle, what's true here? Okay. So in that sense, both of us, each of us separately, could take responsibility for how we were showing up in the relationship. And each of us could take responsibility for understanding the whole context of the relationship, including the nature of the other's desire. notice the difference between understanding and controlling. Like I have no control over what she wants or what she chooses. But I could listen, I could understand her perspective. And by that understanding, it's like there are multiple eyes. Like I am experiencing the whole situation from my perspective and from her perspective. And she was doing the same thing. And this gets to, I mentioned in the title of this parallax, and I mentioned parallax earlier. Parallax is this effect where, so like while you're looking at the screen, if you put your finger somewhere between your face and the screen, but you keep your eyes focused on the screen, you will probably see two shadow fingers, one from each eye. The distance between those two images is called the parallax. Another way you can think of parallax, and this is how I tend to use the term in general, is the difference between the two perspectives, like through the right eye and through the left eye. There's a lot of overlap, but there's also non-overlap. And the overlap allows the eyes to sync up, and the non-overlap gives them some value with which to do the syncing up. If they were literally the same image, there would be no value in having two eyes. But by having the two eyes at a slight distance, so that you're able to get this sort of double image, this allows the process of fusing those two images together to construct a new sense. In this case, the sense of depth perception. Okay. Now, infants don't have depth perception first. Right? They're still orienting to being able to see it all. They actually have difficulty focusing on their environment. They have to train their eyes to focus on anything at all. And then you can watch infants like doing this kind of thing. Whoa! And part of what they're doing is they're getting the experience of their two eyes to overlap, and they're looking at it, and it's like, how do I see this whole thing? And when that fusion happens, that is the process of building the additional sense. If you're familiar with alchemy, what I'm talking about is the coagula step, solve et coagula. You're coagulating, you're bringing together the different pieces, and the resulting thing that emerges is a deep insight, literally to see depth, right? So this is a fantastic metaphor for a huge variety of things. I sometimes envision what we are, the potential for a new culture as the ophanim. This is one of the visions of what a true biblical angel is one of these big, it's a big eye surrounded by spinning wheels made of eyes. So the question is, I remember earlier I was highlighting there is no center. So like nobody in the FDA can actually be responsible for what the FDA does, even the director at the top, because the director at the top, all they can do is try to implement the threat of blame. And the threat of blame echoes through each person's attempt to avoid being blamed, and that they're not optimizing for the whole picture. They're optimizing for keeping their job and not getting in trouble. I see Brandon bringing in, then also, doesn't the two hemispheres of our brain also interpret what each eye sees in a different way? So parallax physically and also mentally with our eyes, whether we intend it to happen or not. Yeah, I think that's a big dynamic of what's going on here. I don't want to go too much into the theory of the two hemispheres, but I think it's worth going into in a larger picture. Like if I were giving like a lecture series specifically on the big picture, I would totally put some emphasis on the nature of the two hemispheres, because the fusion of those and the surrender of the left to the right is actually a huge, huge factor of what's going on here, from what I can tell. So yes. Right, so the reason I bring up parallax is that if you look at the situation with me and my ex, part of the reason we were able to go, we're done, and there was no drama, was because separately, I was getting parallax, getting my perspective and her perspective on the relationship. Okay? And she, separately, was getting her perspective and my perspective on the relationship. And that perspective taking includes the fact that the other is doing this process. So there's a recursive thing. This is not analytic. I'm describing this in an analytic way because I sort of have to describe what the mechanism was. But this wasn't quite how we were thinking about it. We were holding deeply this inquiry of what is true for me, what is true for you, and same-sidedness. The same-sidedness is part of the experience of bringing the two perspectives into parallax, into fusing the parallax into a new perspective. So by doing that, what happened is after a while, we kind of looked at each other. We shared a couple of details and noticed we're converging on the same thing. We're done. And he's like, yeah, we are, aren't we? No, it wasn't a moment. It was, there was a particular moment that was pivotal in my experience, or from my perspective. But we actually weren't sure whether or not we had broken up. It took a little bit of time for us to feel into the details and feel the impact on each of us feeling the impact on each of us, and noticing over time, is this fully true? And it became settled. There is some grief, but it was absolutely clear. Now, having done that, what that means is there was a center for the relationship. From my perspective, the center is in me. And from her perspective, the center is in her. And we can both recognize that that difference in perspectives is key, and that the whole business about same-sidedness and the recognition that the perspective doesn't have power, the same way that, like, from the left eye's perspective, depth perception is seen through the left, kind of. And from the right eye's perspective, depth perception is seen through the right, kind of. But also, they're just contributing, and there's a larger perspective that is holding and accounting for the vision of both eyes. Same thing going on here. It's exactly the same thing. So what I see when I look at where we're going, if there's one option where too much of the human race is too much in me, mine, you have to take care of me, outsourcing responsibility, I'm a child, I need you to do these things for me so that I can regulate, and if you don't, I will pout and be defeated, or I will get mad and upset at you, or I'll go and sort of pretend I'm soothing myself by manipulating other people for their own good. Right? So if people are operating in that, to the extent that they're doing that, if there's too much momentum there, we might end up going through a kind of degrading of civilization, a sort of a collapse of global supply chains. I don't think it would be abrupt. Like, this isn't new. We're watching the old paradigm become senile, and that's part of why we're getting all this political fracturing. And the reason it's getting senile is because we're able to communicate so much more clearly. We are actually seeing the ramifications of there being no responsible center. There's nothing, like, if you look at your if you look at how your depth perception is actually experienced, it's as though you are looking through a window. One window. It doesn't feel like you're looking through your left eye and your right eye. Most of the time, your eyes are kind of invisible. Even like invisible is kind of a weird way to describe it, but it's like it's not present to your experience of depth perception. If you're reminded, hey, you have two eyes, like, of course I have two eyes. It's like a fact, but it's not part of your visual experience of the world that you have these two images. They're fused consistently, and you are seeing from the one eye. One could say your third eye, which is somehow in here. Right? Okay. So that is the perspective from which each of your eyes can be understood in context. In the same way, there is kind of a perspective that is larger than what this human or my ex as a human could fully understand. Like, neither the left eye nor the right eye can actually understand depth perception. They're not equipped to be able to. Something greater and more intelligent emerges from the parallax. In the same way, something greater and more intelligent could emerge from the distributed computation that was happening on each of our minds. Right? Us together syncing up is far, far smarter and wiser than either of us or even the sum of both of us, because this parallax could exist. And so there's another perspective, and you can feel it. This is vivid when you actually experience this. It is not, it is mysterious, but it isn't vague. It is really clear. And it becomes clearer the deeper you can embody your participation in the emergence of this kind of collective consciousness, this sort of shared consciousness. So the problem of the modern civilization is that there is no center that way. There is no third eye. So you have children reacting, saying, mine, 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 hey, that wasn't fair, I need this, mommy, mommy, like everybody's doing this. And then we have these control structures we've managed to build so that these waves of emotional toddlers can end up channeled in ways that successfully build bridges and make sure that we're feeding everybody, kind of. Some people are starving. That's terrible. Okay, but we are not actually solving the problem because we can't see it. We can't see the problem because there's no perspective from which to actually see it. Instead, we're orienting to the problem in terms of what does this mean about me and my needs? Which, I mean, you and your needs are very important, but the way that you care for them is recognizing the context you're embedded in and then caring for the context. But that's hard to see if you're too focused on needing something external to give you what you think you need in order for you to be okay. You're too busy with emotional reactivity. So the short version is I am witnessing more and more this process where different perspectives are coming into parallax and we are building a collective coherent consciousness that is made of sanity and kindness. It has to be. This is actually one of the properties of mimetic evolution. This process is not plausible without building it out of sanity and kindness. It would be unstable and it would fracture. And then it couldn't be the coherent third eye. So what does this feel like on an individual perspective? So from the individual perspective, what this means is if you're orienting to something like climate change, you can't do anything about climate change. Fact. Okay? Now, I don't mean don't bother, just ignore the topic. I'm pointing out a fact about you probably don't have enough power over any levers to be able to affect the oil industry. That doesn't mean you can't get power. You can't extend this in some fashion. Many people do, but you're not going to get there and be lucid, sane, and kind if you're doing it through manipulating via reactivity. Because then the reason you'll be doing it is not because of a wide perspective that you're contributing to a collective consciousness, but is instead because you hurt or are scared or want to feel powerful. And you're going to force this in order to get your private needs met in a way that is out of sync with the collective act of syncing up. So you can build power, but you don't do it by focusing on the power. You do on having the large effect. You do it by focusing on the truth of where your power in fact already is. Getting crystal clear on your lived experience. And one thing that you do have power over is your understanding of the whole picture. So remember that interaction with my now ex. I couldn't control what she chooses or what she wants, but I could come to understand how she makes her choices, what it feels like to be her, what her desires are. And I can do that in a same-sided way. Right? So I'm not doing this in order to figure out what she should do. I'm doing this to perceive clearly. That's it, just to perceive clearly. If I do it in order to figure out what she should do, then there's going to be this pressure of, oh, well, I think you should do this, which is different from, oh, now that I've gotten curious about your perspective and I see you a little more clearly, I think maybe you want this. Is that true? But the reason I'm putting it forward is more like, out of a combination of care and curiosity, I think you might like this. Is that something you would like? Does this make sense for you? And then if she says, oh, no, that's not for me at all, or like, I don't like that suggestion. Like, oh, okay, so I missed something. What did I miss? Right? It's curiosity. Right? I'm not pushing, this is the answer. I'm emphasizing the question more than the answer. So in terms of orienting to something like climate change, the question is, can I understand the question without jumping to assertions about what should happen? I don't know what should happen. If I knew what should happen, then the act of me speaking it would cause everybody to recognize, oh, that is the answer, and we would just do it. So the fact that I don't know that, I don't have any idea what I could say that would ripple out and just cure the entire issue, it means I don't understand the problem. So if I can look at the entire thing and go, what am I missing? Can I see what the resistance is? Can I understand where the resistance comes from? Oh, a bunch of the resistance is actually from people being scared in these particular ways. Oh, right, and I don't know how to address that yet. Right? Just by coming to understand, I can see more and more of the levers of the world and my opinions and perspectives on, oh yeah, this seems like it would be a good policy, putting up more windmills, or more I have to forget the term, but like places to collect wind power, for instance, or solar panels. We need to put up more solar panels. Well, putting up more solar panels would collect more energy, but what is the cost of both building those and of the political force that went into making those be built? What are the ramifications? Can I see those? Can I understand them? So that instead of backing something vehemently, you're starting from, can I understand? Can I see? And can I recognize how this relates to, oh, when I leave a light on in a room, it has this kind of power effect. And this is the size of the power effect. I have the power drain. This is my contribution to climate change. But if I remove the guilt, which I'm using to try to force my behavior to change, I don't know what my behavior should be. Does it make sense for me to turn off the light? Why do I leave it on? I guess it's just absent-mindedness here. But over here, if I leave the light off, it's actually hard for me to navigate the room. So there's actually a pragmatic experience I have for like being able to even find the light switch if I turn off the light. This is complicated. So this actually impacts me personally. How does that relate to the larger picture? What are the trade-offs? So as I do that, I'm actually not just seeing an abstract theory, but I'm embodying my personal relationship to the larger question. Now, this goes one more step, and I'll get to that in a moment, but I see that Brandon put something here. Is the center something that emerges out of the pieces, or is the center fragmented into the pieces? Fragmented so that the pieces forget where they came from? As in, do we have one vision that then gets fragmented into different perspectives from each eye? Or do the two views from each eye then get pulled together into one? Totally fine if you don't want to try to respond to that here. Yeah, I don't know the deep existential answer to that question. My impression from the deep structures of consciousness is that, of course, it starts out from one vision. That one vision is something like is, or I am. And then what we are, I think that creates the universe. And then what we're watching are the shards recollecting in order to do something like go through isness's embodiment within the flow of time. And this is sort of the lucidity of is prior to and outside of time showing up within time. That's my guess. Pragmatically, in terms of things that I think materialism would be happy to also hear, so in something that's a little more paradigm independent, it seems obvious to me that we are building perspectives that have not existed before. The same way that an infant did not have depth perception that is being reconstructed after they're born. They're actually growing depth perception the same way they grew their physical eyes in the first place. Not the same mechanism, but in sort of analogously. So that's my impression. Okay, so in terms of, back to the climate change example. Oh, you're responding here. I find it easier to bring different things together by taking the perspective that it comes from one, rather than attempting to put pieces into a whole. Cool. So in terms of how this would, the thing I'm describing about perceiving the whole and relating it to your individual perspective, how would this actually address climate change? So what happens, so that process, like the human mind, as, and I mean this like the human race's mind seen as a single thing, is not yet coherent. That's what when I say a sane, kind human race, I mean as though the human race is an entity that is sane and kind, and that sanity and kindness reaches down to apply to each of the individuals that make it up. So that's some of the vision here. That mind is not yet coherent. So what I'm describing here is the process of bringing that mind into coherence. But that mind already thinks. The same way most people's minds are not very coherent, but they're able to think. And some of the way that you see that kind of thinking is, for instance, on social media, on Twitter, through the news. All human communication is something analogous to the way that synapses communicate information between neurons in your brain. It's exactly analogous. When I say exactly, what do I mean by exact? And then across what analogy? But there's a lot of close analogy there. Structurally, it does basically the same thing. So right now, a lot of that thinking is intertwined with victim consciousness, with a lot of force and people making demands on their own private needs. This is part of what I mean by there's no center. There's no place where the thinking relates to. There is no one thinking. Instead, thoughts pass through people. This is part of why I emphasize so much about mimetic literacy. Clearly perceiving how memes work is actually a very important part of learning how to be conscious of the process by which the human race as an entity thinks. It's like watching a signal go through several neurons. You're just watching the neural activity fire off. So if you can't see that at all, you cannot consciously participate in the understanding of metacognition for being able to orient to how thinking works and how to improve thinking. You cannot participate in the human race meditating in order to bring itself into coherence if you cannot see how these thoughts work. Because instead, you are thought. You become a vessel for the thinking instead of being a participant in consciousness. So absolutely vital. It's absolutely vital. In order for people to be able to participate at the forefront of the evolution of the human race, they've got to become aware of memes. Whether it's by that term and by that lens doesn't matter. The thing I'm describing, this is part of the larger point, the vision that I'm talking about. This is my way of talking about it. But there are many other people who are describing perspectives that are very compatible. They're a little different, but as we bring them into Parallax, we come to recognize, oh, we are talking about the same thing. But the difference in our way of approaching it actually highlights something valuable that lets us see more. It lets us see more deeply. It creates a new sense of depth perception, metaphorically speaking. So the fact that it is occurring spontaneously highlights the fact that we're tracking something true. Kind of the same way that calculus was created roughly spontaneously. So this is not my idea, although this particular vision is absolutely due to the thinking and reflection and examination of this human, this neuron. Okay. So how would this, the transformation we're talking about is a shift in how thinking occurs, from blame, shame, pain, shatter to coherence, clarity, perception, understanding, coherence. So what happens, so the act of me looking at the global picture and coming to understand more and more of, oh, what is going on, means that my human mind becomes more and more a clear and helpful platform for the distributed computation of thinking about how to solve the problem. The center I can think more clearly with my mind and with other minds like mine. It's actually, it's not very helpful if I'm single-handedly pushing this vision forward and trying to understand the whole picture. I mean, it's, if no one else is doing it, but I am, okay, great, at least I'm contributing a little bit. But the real power is showing up when many people are doing this process. So what would happen if you have a lot of people doing this? And it doesn't even have to be most people. It just has to be enough. And I'm not clear on what exactly enough means, what proportion of the population it would have to be. But I think it wouldn't have to be most of them. I think you could have less than half the population like this, maybe less than 10%. I don't know. But what would happen is, like, so we'd have these ongoing conversations with each other, interacting with people who are not taking the full perspective, but their perspective still matters because they're part of the material of what has to be accounted for. So when someone says, down with the oil industry, and you're looking at them going, oh, okay, you are possessed by this particular mimetic structure. That mimetic structure feels really important to you and you're getting something out of it. What specifically are you getting out of it? Oh, okay, this sense of meaning, right? And this alleviation of pain. That's an important factor in what the overall answer has to be. So I see that. Okay. So the more we account for that and we interact with it, go, am I understanding this right? You feel this way? Okay. And if I say this, how do you experience it? Okay, great. Oh, what's my perspective? Oh, I see this. Oh, that really upsets you. Okay, you can't hear me right now. All right. And here's a piece that I think you can hear. Okay, great, great. So it is like this free exchange of, this is what I see. And this is what matters to me. I'm not talking about something unemotional. I'm talking about what matters to me. Oh yeah, I want a family. I want my family to be secure in their ability to eat, even as the world goes through these weird fluctuations. These things matter to me. That matters a lot. How does that relate to what the solution is for climate change? I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but I know it's got to relate somehow because I am part of the puzzle. And my desire is not unique. There are many other instances like this, variations on the flavors. All of that has to be accounted for. So what would happen is very much like what happened between me and my ex, when we looked at each other and we went, oh, we're done, aren't we? Okay. Something like that would happen. What would happen is I would be chewing on it, or I would encounter some little factoid or something. And then I get this funny tickle of, wait a second, if we did this, if we do these 5 things, wouldn't that address the whole thing? No, the important part here is that I don't go, I have to get this out, I have to make everybody understand, because that's more of the hooky thing. Instead, it's just true. This looks clear to me. If you have experience with proving a theorem, or seeing the solution to a programming problem, it's going to have much that kind of flavor to it. Oh, it's this, isn't it? And then the act of bringing it forward, in part, is checking, did I miss something? But is also, hey, I think, wouldn't it be this? And one of the signs that that I'm right would be if I do something like go onto Twitter, and then I see other people are already posting, hey guys, did we just solve climate change? I think it's something like, and they might describe it differently, like these 7 points, and go, oh yeah, I framed it this way with these 5 points. I think this is the way that you connect the 2 perspectives so that they sync up. Oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Oh, but your thing highlights this detail over here that I think was implied by my model, but I didn't notice that. And then we notice this stuff clicking together, and then it's just, oh. And so now we just do it. because obviously I want to participate. And obviously I know others are going to participate because they already, like, it is personally incentivized. Not just because they saw the picture, but because the solution is designed to be something that attends to what each person truly wants. And then that effect would ripple through, and different pockets would catch on of, wait, why are people acting this way? Oh, because we're pretty sure we solved it. Here's the solution. Like, do you see any problem? No, I don't. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Okay, great. I guess I'm going to change how I interact with my lights in this way. And I'm going to go to these meetings in the town once a month so that we can check in with each other, like whatever the points are. Like, I have no idea. I have no idea. I have to make up random stuff. So what that is the human race having thought through the problem and, oh, and the oh ripples through all the way to the level of individual action, because that's what a real solution is. A real solution isn't an idea that if you were to force it to happen would work. It is something that when you actually see it clearly, the act of seeing it is part of its implementation and it naturally happens. So that, and then rippled out to the people who are saying, down with the oil industry. Well, we would have already accounted for it because those people, frankly, are acting like children. And so when the adults recognize, oh, this is the solution. And so, of course, this is how we interact with the kids. Because we can, I guess part of the point of being an adult is that you have more power and more vision than a child. So if you, particularly, and there's a piece here that's missing about mimetic propagation, but if you're coming from a sane and kind perspective from the kid, where you're not trying to undermine their sovereignty, but you're also not letting them run around with the hatchet to beat it into the walls whenever they want to, right? There's like, I can intervene on this, but let me do so in a way that respects their sovereignty. The same kind of thing would happen in terms of, like, down with the oil industry. We need to really get rid of those Republicans or whatever. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, okay. And now we actually can feel this is the action path that answers the pain that is at the core, that actually resolves the whole problem. It's part of why it's messy. Every problem is intertangled right now. And the core issue, like ultimately, the stuff comes down to, we do not have civilization level tools yet for encouraging people to actually go through the maturation process such that physical adults are also emotional adults. And eventually, I think what we're looking at in the future is that becoming part of our cultural tech, part of our default psychotechnology. Mimetic literacy would be as standard as verbal literacy in the sense of being able to read. That people having really strong emotional challenges would be automatically reason for them to have the resources they need to process it without making it so that they atrophy the strengths that are needed for them to summon the resources by their own choice, right? Because that atrophy would also make them dependent. So it's not about rescuing, it's about accounting for the fact that people who are way beyond range can't build their range. So how do you support people in coming into range without that becoming fuel for more victim consciousness? That's a complicated question, but we will have answered it. So this is a different branch. If we do not have too much momentum in our stuck, like in our childlike way of operating, if we do not have too much momentum there such that we have to go through a breakdown of civilization, we have to go through another cycle of, okay, let's see if we can figure out how to distribute maturity and then rebuild. Like, if we don't have to go through all of that, or even if we do, like at the other end, it seems to me like eventually the human race has to go through something like this. We do this, or eventually we find some way to destroy ourselves, like a nuclear war that wipes out all of our food supply, or we create artificial intelligence in a way that kills all of human life. Like this, we'll do something eventually if we don't grow into this kind of lucidity. But I think that we, like, it's hard to tell because it does feel dangerously close, but I think that we do actually have the capacity to bring in enough true maturity that the human race can become a sane kind entity. It's unclear how long that would take, but there are some models that make it seem to me like it is quite plausible for it to happen in the next 50 years. And I say it like it's a binary thing, but what I mean is right now, the way that nations argue with each other is basically threat-based and trying to constrain one another. And there's a veneer of friendliness, but that veneer of friendliness is to a very large extent made of the fact that there are a lot of places that could obliterate each other with nuclear weapons. What would it take for nations to get rearranged so that that's not the dynamic anymore, and instead everyone has a same-sided orientation to the entire human race? And there are going to be exceptions, but for same-sidedness to be the baseline, not just the narrative, but the sense of, yeah, we're not, it's not just we're in this together. It's the type of thing that astronauts get. Like, I forget what the name of the effect is, but astronauts would experience this thing of when taken out into space, they would see the globe and see, and it would do something to their sense of consciousness. And some of them, I forget which astronaut mentioned this, but a lot of them said things along the lines of, I wanted to go grab politicians and drag them up here and say, look at that motherfucker. Wake up. Right. And the reason being that when you actually understand the context you're embedded in, most of the arguments that we have don't make any sense. They don't make any sense at all. All this stuff about obsessing over oppressing the marginalized. In abstract, this makes sense, but the way that it's argued does not. It is unkind. It makes the problem worse. The mockery, the threats is the foundation for negotiation. The whole thing is, it doesn't work. It doesn't work to create a sane kind world. Now, that doesn't mean kumbaya, let's just all love each other. That's implausible. That doesn't answer the question. And the fact that we've tried to do this before and it's resulted in things like the hippie revolution, which was interesting, but it didn't actually transform the world at a truly deep level, in the sense of we're not seeing politics transformed, even though the people who are in power were the hippies. There's so much to say there, but this perspective, you can also a lot of cults are based on naive trust. I'm not talking about naive trust or naive love. Let's just love everyone, right? The New Age movement is not exactly rocking political force that has the power over nuclear weapons. It's not exactly doing a whole lot about artificial intelligence. So I'm not talking about naive love here. I'm talking about absolutely lucid, precise clarity of consciousness that goes through the mind as well as the heart. It's not enough to have a kind world. We need a sane kind world. That sanity is really important. What I'm describing is what it is like for individuals to participate in the emergence of and then the existence of a sane kind world. See, Brandon brings in maybe it will be like that aha scenario example you made up about figuring out climate change. Aha, in order to solve the problem of problems well, we need to mature. It is so obvious. How could I not have seen it before? Yeah, I think that's part of what happens at an individual scale. The whole thing I'm talking about, like this as a vision of what we are doing, is like, oh, and the more deeply that clicks for an individual, the easier it is to participate. And then at the collective level, how do we encourage this bootstrapping? But it can't just be made of self-reference. It can't just be made of self-reference. It's also got to be made of things like when I'm interacting with my family, how do we navigate things like, oh, do we want a garden? How are we going to keep the kitchen clean when we're living in the same space? When if I want to date someone and I interact with her, and how does that interaction go in a way that does the dating dance beautifully and honors this? Like these are very, very practical questions, and they have a lot of them have very practical answers. So answering these questions at the very grounded level of, oh, I this is not the greatest example, but I think it helps. When So when I have lunch with my parents, and we clean up the dishes afterwards, so the kitchen's totally clean when we're done. I've learned that my father has a little bit of difficulty keeping track of what goes in the dishwasher and what needs to be washed by hand. And even for the things that go in the dishwasher, he puts a bunch of them in the sink. And pointing this out to him doesn't change his behavior. When he puts them in the sink, when he's standing in front of the sink, nobody else can reach them. So it ends up creating this limitation in the speed. And when I pointed this out to him, he acknowledges it and then he keeps doing it. So this is a place where when I see the whole picture, I notice, okay, so I can account for the whole system a little bit better than Dad can. So if I put myself in front of the sink before Dad gets there, I can coordinate things so that what Dad ends up doing ends up helping better in parallel. And this is just once I saw the solution, I just went, oh, and the act of like the fact that I wanted the kitchen to get clean fairly quickly. I don't really want to spend the whole afternoon standing there waiting for things to become in reach for me to put them in the dishwasher and waiting to be able to get the washcloth. I can instead sort of orchestrate. And I have the perspective to be able to orchestrate. So doing that, the kitchen gets done in about a third of the time. Like it takes about a third of the time to get done. So that's a very, in that case, I'm acting as the center. Like this human is acting as the center. It's not really emergent in the same kind of way that it was with my ex. But it's totally an example of the type of thing that I'm talking about, where zooming in on the pragmatics of how do you actually deal with the real physical world in these terms? There's no resentment on my part. Dad just doesn't have the capacity to be able to track these things. Pointing it out to him doesn't seem to build the capacity right now. And I can see some of why. But I see enough of the facts of the situation that a solution is just, oh, it's this. And I can enact that solution in a way that works well for Dad, it works well for Mom, works well for the kitchen, works well for me. And because of that, I just do it. Completely clean. I mean, not just clean in the kitchen, but I mean emotionally clean, very, very streamlined. So while what I'm talking about definitely affects this major scale stuff, the way that it happens is because it's grounded in immensely practical things that are lived. It is all embodied. Every step is embodied. Which is part of why I see real hope for this. This is something that is absolutely advantageous for individuals to learn how to do, even if no one else does it. So the game theory is perfect. Right? It does a little bit better than matching the coercive social structure at its own game. So if the only way for me to navigate a particular situation is for me to butt heads with somebody who is not taking anything of the same sided view, I actually have more capacity to be able to meet them in that headbutting, because I don't have to make what's going on mean something about me. I'm valuing their experience as well. That actually gives me more coherence and more force with which I can meet them. So it's actually just strictly a stronger strategy. The transition creates some funniness, creates a lot of funniness, and it can result in a lot of breakdown of competence and noticing of things like, oh, this marriage or this job or this friendship or where I'm living actually doesn't make sense. And that can be very upsetting. Quite literally, it upsets, it knocks things over, it shakes things up. But it's freeing and it's true. And that's the part that matters. So this is why I don't do activism anymore. As the closest thing to an activist I am is doing my best to embody this stuff and speaking about it, sharing this when I can, and learning how to share it more clearly, more freely, in ways that are kind to me. Me engaging with understanding the picture in a larger perspective, because I try to embody this. That's my activism. But it's not just, this is absolutely not the thing that people worry about with spiritual bypassing. This isn't about, you're not really dealing with racism. Oh, that's an interesting opinion there. I see a lot more detail about racism than most people who talk about critical race theory do. It's just not clear to me yet what the answer is. But I do know that the answer is not threatening people into compliance with a theory that doesn't negotiate. For example. So there's a crispness to this, availableness. So yeah, so that's pretty much the shtick. If you feel like you've got it, great. Finding your ways of articulating it is part of how we build the opening. Because it doesn't matter whether you like, oh, I think that makes sense. I like that idea. I'm going to choose to believe it. That's not helpful. What's really helpful is when you can see for yourself the truth of it. And part of the process of seeing for yourself the truth of it is making it your own. Maybe reframing it, rephrasing it, finding out places where, oh, actually, I see what Michael's talking about, and here's the structure that I recognize, and these are my terms. But this highlights a place where Michael, I think, is actually a little off right here. We actually do need activism in this part right here, for instance. In which case, I would love to hear that. Because if you see it clearly and you can come from the same sided point of view, coming up and saying, actually, I think we do need to push, and I think that it's something you would want to do too. But even if you don't want to, I think you want to see this. The chances are very good the answer is yes. So making it your own, I think, is a really key part of this. It's not a matter of believing me or following me. This is a matter of we are all trying to build a same kind human race. Some of us are doing it by working through the childishness that we still embody. I think we're all doing that to some extent. Some of us are doing it by learning how to process the pain of the hurt children inside others, just being able to hold that space and feel it, sort of moving it through, almost like the image of Jesus suffering on the cross. Like, let me take the pain of the world and move it through my system. This is one of the pieces that I'm working through. Some of us are working on seeing the whole thing clearly so that we can talk clearly about it, so that the human race can become self-aware as an entity. That's where I put my emphasis, but it builds on the previous two. It has to. It has to. And there are other things that I have no clue about yet, I am sure, because this is just building the foundation. The ability for the human race to go, I'm awake. Thank you, Brandon. He says, you're a pretty cool fellow neuron, Michael. Thanks for being here. Received. Feelings mutual. Okay, so that's over an hour and a half. That's way more than enough time. I'm going to close this here. I will make announcements of any future live streams. Assume that any going forward, if I don't announce, they're not happening. Yeah, and also feel free to reach out to me, to like comment on this Facebook thread or on YouTube where I'll upload this. I read all of these. And I guess I should also mention, I run this space Mage that is designed to hold people in a place where they can effectively be more effective present neurons for this emerging consciousness. to the best of my ability to hold a space for people who want that. So if you really love the kind of perspective that I'm giving, and you want to saturate yourself in a kind of context that I would hold, reach out to me. Right? Send me a PM. Right now it's probably on Facebook, but you can also you could also directly apply if you want to on if you go to mages.mn.co. I may be rearranging things, but at least right now, toward the end of July 2022, I have. If you go there, you'll see both a video where I talk specifically about Mage from back in 2021, and then below that is an application. So if that's something that inspires you, touches you, feels resonant, feel free to take a look there, and we'll be in touch. And if not, if you just like listening to my ideas, and this is just one of many, and you don't feel called into it, that's totally fine too. I'll be talking more about Mage reasonably soon in its own terms, I expect. So this is not like the only opportunity to feel what's going on. Great. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you around.